To be our best, we need to stay up to date on the latest and greatest. That includes being equipped with prime tools and gear. That's where ShieldBox comes in. It's a monthly subscription box designed specifically for law enforcement professionals. Each month, you'll get a curated box of duty gear and supplies from industry leaders. Sign up today at theshieldbox.com and use code BLUEGRIT to save $10 on your first box.
I'm never going to see my spouse. This isn't going to work out. This is too hard. Well, it is going to be if we have that type of attitude. In regards to your job, it doesn't have to be nitty-gritty details. You can still protect them while kind of telling them what you need.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca from Proud Police Wife. She builds her own content, a lot of this on social media and her own podcast, talking about a lot of the dynamics of exactly what that sounds like, right? First responder, police, families. So I'm excited to have her on because we've seen a lot of popularity, a lot of traction with these topics, which is a very pleasant surprise, I suppose, when I started this. I thought a lot of it would be, nutrition and kind of like work-life balance and managing stress just in our own kind of internal mechanisms, which is great that there is a lot of that. But at the same time, what I thought, maybe the audience or the community would not be as into is like the home dynamic. But I love seeing that those are sometimes the most popular or quickly distributed and shared shows. So without further ado, Rebecca, thank you for doing what you do. We're going to get into that, but thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for having me. I'm so honored to be here. And I love being able to, as a podcast host, kind of flip and come to the other side
Yeah.
and be a guest too. And I'm so excited. And honestly, we'll get into it. But like you mentioned, I'm just excited to see more people talking about just the family dynamic because the officer doesn't serve alone. And so it's so important to include the family and have those discussions. So I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I think about it a lot, and I think about how even in the stressful times of all types, like physical stress, like in person, and then the mental kind of stress, and a lot of that is on that side now, especially being a lame admin, right? Just headaches and just work stuff. Sometimes it's the same thing that anyone in corporate life might deal with, personnel stuff. But how, my wife, Chelsea's just always there for me. And I think about so much from literally like my critical incidents and how I would or would not have managed it without her. So, shout out to all the spouses and all the family members and the kids, right? And so, we couldn't do it without all of you all. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, I have the same sentiment. Like the spouses are truly the backbone and they, are kind of, on at home on the front lines, just making sure everything's running. And they want to be there to listen to you and support you as an officer. And so I think it's so important to like include them in these type of conversations. And you mentioned the kids too, and the kids serve, but kind of just in a totally different way. Just, knowing that their mom or dad aren't going to have to be there on maybe Christmas Day. Maybe you have to celebrate the day before or, what have you. But they, they're part of that dynamic and they have a little bit of impact from the job as well. And so I think it's important to include them too. So thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm super spoiled. Like my 5-year-old, she's getting to this age where she recognizes what I'm doing in some way, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
mean that by she can say what the job is and recognize like what, how I'm dressed and what that supposedly means, even though I explain it in a lot of different ways. But even for her to be at this age now where it's not always about mom, as the dad, like I feel like it was always about mom for quite a while. And now it's like, oh, you're going to work? Oh, bummer. Like she's sad about it and don't see you
Right.
till tomorrow because I come home
Right.
well after her bedtime. But that's just like, that pales in comparison to your general first responder. So I am recognizing my privilege, like in having flexibility in my schedule. But, she asked why I work so late. And I'm like, well, I have a lot of guys that work late and I have to see them. Like that's part of my
Right.
job is to do a good job. I have to see if they need help or talk about things. She's like, oh, okay. But um, yeah, all to say for especially the people that work graves, they don't, your average officer doesn't just get to shift a schedule so easily without finding coverage and all these different
Yeah.
mechanisms.
Yeah, and it took a long time, I think, for my husband to get to that point too. Like he's been in now over 18 years. And
Nice.
so, we have 3 kids and they're 13, 11, and 8. And so we've been through, so many different stages of that. And so I remember having toddlers and having them literally, I remember my son like trying to block the door because he didn't want my husband to leave because it
Yeah.
had been days and days and days. And it was like an on-call week, and so it was really long, and, that just broke my heart, and, to try to you do all the things as a mom to try to calm them down or distract them or, and he just didn't want daddy to leave, and but, I had this conversation with someone recently is that you when you're in the moment and you see that your kids might be struggling or, it's bedtime and I'm doing, sometimes bedtime on my own because my
Yeah.
husband is, depending on his shift or if he's working late. And so, and they ask those things like, where's daddy? What do you think daddy's doing right now? Or I'll tell them, oh, only, 2 more sleeps until daddy gets to put you to bed. That was
Mm-hmm.
kind of when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so much they get it and it's pretty routine. But now looking back, I can say that honestly, I think our kids are really resilient for going, being able to go through what they went through. And now, like my daughter, who's just about to turn 13, she's just like, yeah, my dad has a different schedule sometimes. It's cool. And, like they
Yeah.
have very much adapted. And so it's kind of nice to be on that other
Mm-hmm.
side and not in the thick of it and having to explain too much. Like I remember in the beginning too, we used to live in like a cookie cutter type neighborhood. Now we live like out in the middle of nowhere. But during that
It's
time,
kind
it
of a
would
cop way sometimes, or a first
yes.
responder way to be like, get off the grid. Yeah.
Yep, that's kind of how we were. And so, and really in the beginning my husband did not want to live in a cookie cutter neighborhood, but I was like, look, you work different shifts. Like I want to be around people and I need to be able to get out and like, push the kids in a stroller
Mm-hmm.
around. I just didn't want to be like at home.
Isolated. Yeah.
Yes, yes, but now I was like, "Yeah, we can move out." So we moved a couple years ago, but, when we did live in that neighborhood, it was interesting because there would be a ton of kids outside playing kind of after school, and you would see, like, moms and dads or just one parent coming home from work all about the same time, and our kids would start to ask questions like, "Is our dad coming home soon? Is daddy coming home soon?" I'm like, no, like it will be soon, but not around the same time as everybody else. And so, there would be questions like that. And that was, I think, hard in that moment. Like you try to find the right words to explain it. And they didn't understand then, but now looking back, they do get it. They're smarter than we think they are, and they
Oh,
do
yeah.
get it in their own way. And I think we just have to explain things in kid-friendly terms that they can understand. And then also the positive of it too is, I've said many times to my kids that we definitely want daddy home and we miss daddy, but there's someone that needs daddy right now.
Mm.
And daddy's out helping and he misses us just as much as we miss him. And he would much rather be at home,
Yeah.
with us, but this is what, daddy does. This is how he serves. And so usually that answer kind of suffices for them and they're good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's definitely when you come full spectrum and see from like little kids and you're starting to have that conversation to almost like teenage years, it's just, different dynamic, but it's not bad. It's kind of good.
Yeah, yeah. I hear a lot of themes of balance, right? And I think
Yeah.
work-life balance is kind of illusion. I think for most people, and as I continue to kind of dive into it and try to build resources for folks, especially first responders, is I think it's kind of a fool's errand to maintain this balance all the time just by virtue of the job, right? Especially
Yeah.
for folks like firefighters that might work 48 to 72 hours just away. Like, how can you put on this guise of illusion? But what I like to think of it is as like recalibration, rebalancing, maybe reorienting or management, right? So just to be successful in anything, you have to really pour into it, but you can't
Right.
pour into everything all the time. And so that's
Yeah.
where shout out to the home life, the spouses that are managing everything on the front line. Because I've made
Right.
this joke. I was like, there's definitely days where even having one kid or one toddler, a little bit ago, where that was very difficult compared to like running a crew in a critical incident, with a
Right,
potential
right.
hostage situation. Like that's very clear what I need to do and what the progression of events might be. With a
Right.
toddler, not very clear oftentimes. So I
Yeah.
feel it. But then also like balance with like regards to lifestyle. I mean, a lot of us in first responder work, we chose this. Like our spouses didn't tell us, "Hey, you got to go do that." Generally, I've seen a couple situations like that. Like, "Hey, like my wife thinks it'd be a great job, and I need to get a better job." Usually, that doesn't really pan out super well.
Right.
However, it's like we make the choice, and then oftentimes it is a family decision or awareness or agreement that makes it actually work or not. And so
Yeah.
even you living more in like that development type of home, and then later being like, okay, cool, the kids are old enough, and we're established, we know our routines. I
Right.
think that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
also another note that I kind of am drawing out is that the recognition between how you process and talk about things with your kids, because even with the shift work and the dynamics, shoot, I mean, we could just hyperfixate on how it's so hard to do all this. Like, life's hard enough, kids are hard enough, and then we're going to do this shift work and first responder, and it's dangerous. But if we overfixate, then we're just kind of doomed too, right? Like, so
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I feel like I'd prefer to do what I do, or even when I was on the grind and patrol work day to day, than traveling abroad, for
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
5-10 days. Like I have some colleagues or some friends from school that do that, and I don't know how they do that. Like I don't want to do it. So it's
No,
it's kind
no.
of to each their own.
Yeah, and I had a podcast episode that just came out today. We're middle of January as we're recording this, but and it's titled Embracing the Suck. But usually what that means is it's hard, get up, get over it.
Hmm.
But really I think in our spouse's line of work, it can take on a different kind of meaning in the sense that at least for me, I put a different spin on the term embracing the suck because I think that, there are going to be situations in our spouse's career and with their job that are hard, but it's how we choose to respond and what we do with that hard.
Yes.
And so, it's a lot about mindset, I think,
Hmm.
because, we can't just sit in this kind of, I don't like to use the word victim, but like victim mentality or like,
Yeah. Absolutely.
this is like, I'm never going to see my spouse. This isn't going to work out. This is too hard. Well, it is going to be if we have that type of attitude, I think.
Hmm.
Like we really have to decide that, we can be, intentional with our time. We can choose to have, discussions with our spouse to be able to communicate better. There are things we can do. And really in life, I think that there's just about a solution for just about anything. And
Yeah.
so, even no matter how hard it is, it doesn't always mean bad.
No,
And so, I
it's
think
good
that
a lot of times. Yeah.
yeah. And like what I said earlier, like I truly believe our kids are more resilient because they are so flexible. And, if we have to change plans and pivot, it is not a big deal. And there are no, very seldom are there meltdowns or, and not just because they're a little bit older, but even when they were younger, like we would pivot things a lot and our plans would change sometimes because of my husband's schedule and things like that. And or who would pick them up like when I was still teaching full time, like who would pick them up or what time they would get picked up, things would change and they were okay.
Yeah.
And so, you know, going through these harder things or maybe things that we're just not used to. Like my husband and I are high school sweethearts. And so we went many years with just, not doing shift work and not doing the, different things or aspects that come with having a career in law enforcement. So all of that was new for us. And there were so many different things we had to work through as a couple in the beginning. But now, 19 years, passed, and, we have a lot of that figured out. Are we perfect? No. But having, I think, a good mindset that you are open to really figuring out a solution, I think will really take you far.
Yeah, I love that. And this course that I've been kind of plugging and it's almost done. It'll be done by the time this airs, but it's Get Gritty and it really starts with mindset.
I
It's
love that.
talking about building this resilience and this adaptability, like your internal grit that helps you balance these things and toggle these things, work, life, health, everything. But it all starts with mindset. And I love, you're speaking my language when you talk about the avoidance and deterrence of like that victim type of mentality that it's so pervasive. And the more we think it, the more we speak it, we're going to think and speak it into existence. And so
Yeah.
recognizing that that's absolutely a thing. And I love how you brought up communication. Like we can be so intentional and positive and thinking constructively about how do we just start with what we have and slowly build better communication and better systems, better expectations so that we can move the needle to this really robust place for our relationship and for our family because I would take the most hectic kind of work life, first responder, call out, all that really kind of touch and go scheduling with good boundaries, good expectations, good communication, good trust, than just a 9 to 5 in a cubicle corporate America. Without that, like
Oh, yeah,
that's going to be the game changer as far as like relationships. So I love that you
for
brought that
sure.
up.
Well, and my husband, knowing how kind of like he works and how I don't know, just a driven person he is, he would be miserable at a
Mm,
desk job and a
yeah,
9 to 5. Like that is not how he is built, how he is wired. And so I think that's what makes him a really great police officer
yeah,
too, is he's, very driven and very eager and self-motivated. And so all of those things I think help him to have a great career. And so I would much rather have this lifestyle than have him in a job that he doesn't enjoy. And that, I mean, in turn, that would impact our family too
yeah.
if he was miserable at his job. And I can confidently say, like, still after all this time, all these years, he loves going to work. He absolutely loves his job. But he also loves his family and he's very
Yeah.
good at coming home and making sure that, he's meeting the needs of our family and he's in tune with us. And so he's done a really good job at that balance, but it's also taken, work for the two of us too to
Mhm.
figure those things out. And one thing I wanted to mention too when you were talking earlier is I think that a lot of times when I think whether you're newer to law enforcement or maybe you're just in a new relationship and that partner is new to you figuring
Mhm.
out like they're
Yeah, new
trying to
to the
get used to
life.
you. Right,
Yeah.
new to this lifestyle, if I could get my words out. But whatever situation you're in, I think it's important to realize for the person that's new in this is it's really hard to try to figure everything out that's new at one time.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just focus on one aspect at a time because there's no way you can tackle like, schedules and understanding what your partner is going through on the job, how to help them, boundaries. Like there are so many aspects we could talk about, but trying to figure all that out in kind of one season of life, I think would be really difficult. And
Mhm.
so, yes, the goal is to have that balance, but I think it's sort of fluid in the sense that we're not going to find that balance in one fell swoop. Like it's not going to be one conversation. Oh man, it didn't work out. Like let's, throw in the
Yeah.
towel.
Yeah.
I think it's just going to be ever evolving. And even for my husband and I, there are times where if his schedule changes or his position in the department he's at changes, we have to make a shift again. We have to pivot a little bit. And it helps now with the experience that we've had, but we're still making a shift and we're making small changes based on that shift in the season that we're in. It's not everything at one time. And I think that can be hard for some people who are either new to law enforcement or in a new relationship with someone at law enforcement.
Yeah. No, that's so wise. It's like just the gradual work. And you think about translating to anything else. Like, do you expect results in the gym overnight? No. And if you try to get them, you'll probably hurt yourself and or create this really unhealthy balance with diet or what have you, right? So it's just knowing that slow and steady wins the race and fixate and focus on where you are strong so you can bolster that and maintain that because that's going to be like the support mechanism through the change. I got a buddy who's not in law enforcement, but with a kid coming on the way and a kid already here, and then both of them are looking at different job opportunities. Like they game plan together, and they're like, you know what? Like timing is everything. And if we can manage the kiddo, we feel good about that. But you look at this job, I will wait. And then after that settles out, then I'll look at maybe making a work transition, right? Like, let's not throw all the eggs up in the air and try to catch them all at the same time. But
Exactly.
I think that there's so much that we can take just from the hecticness and the volatility oftentimes in our lifestyle in this type of work.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's such a good point because, trying to make too many changes too, it just
Hmm.
at one time in your life, that's not going to yield the type of balance that you're going for. Or at least I think it would definitely slow it down. It would take longer to get there because it's not just you're trying to now as a couple or as a family figure out the dynamic for one situation in your life. You're doing multiple and that ebb and flow, I think it could be.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between motivation and discipline, right? So we can all get
Yeah,
really motivated. We watch an awesome movie or like listen to this motivational speech or like after this podcast, people are like, cool, I'm going to make my marriage, my relationship like the best first
right.
responder relationship ever. And it's going to take all this, like these meetings and journaling, and we're going to share and we're going to go talk to somebody. I mean, slow and steady, right? Like that might not be sustainable. And then you have all this other stuff called life to manage at the same time. Rebecca, I want to ask you like where this all started. Like you have this
Yeah.
very robust presence. Clearly, it takes a lot of time to do all this, and you're managing a household, 3 kids. So, and you were working, for a stint. So, yeah, where was the genesis for this whole project?
So honestly, I think it started way back when my husband first started in the academy. It was just that it almost felt like, and I don't say this in a bad way at all, but like a slap in the face in the sense that we were together for, several years,
Hmm.
went through high school and college. And then he started the police academy. And it wasn't that it was bad, it was just it was so I didn't realize how intense that was going to be for him, and then that just kinda changed the dynamic of our relationship a little bit. We didn't have as much time to spend together. Our schedules were becoming opposite a little bit, especially when he went into, like, FTO. And so I just had questions like, are other couples going through what we're
Hmm.
going through?
Hmm.
And honestly, I would Google things. I mean, this is 19 years ago. I would Google
Yeah.
things.
Was there anything?
There was nothing,
Yeah.
just absolutely
Yeah.
nothing, except like a few articles with like scary high divorce rates and very negative
Very cool. That's
things
helpful.
to say. Right. It
Yeah.
was just, there
Hmm.
was nothing. And then about 7, 8 years later, I was still teaching at the time, but we had just had our second daughter. And for anyone that doesn't know, teaching doesn't bring in a lot of money. And so the daycare cost was going to be about the same as my income. And so we had decided that I was going to stay home for just a little bit, like maybe like a year.
Hmm.
And while because we also had another toddler at the time. So we had 2 kids at that time. And so I was going to stay home for a little bit while I was home. And I tend to be a pretty self-motivated, driven person. And after a couple months, I was like, I love being home. I want to like still do this, but I need something for myself. And I always had on my heart to just serve this community in some way. It just bothered me that there weren't resources that were positive out there, like I had seen or lack thereof 19 years ago, but it was like 8 years prior. And so I was like, you know what? I like to write. Writing has always been a passion of mine. And so I was like, I'm just going to start a blog and I'm just going to start writing a little bit like about our experience. And I just want to share that it's not all negative and you can work through these things and you can find ways to adjust. And so I thought, I'm just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. We'll kind of see what happens. And
Just like
um,
your
I,
toddlers were doing, literally.
Literally, like,
Yeah.
and it was crazy too. Like, I mean, just with my husband's schedule, like, there was really no time for me to even do this. So I would put my kids to bed and I would go down in our basement in my little office and write from like 8 p.m. to like 1 a.m.
Oh my gosh. You're in
And
that flow
then
state.
yes.
I
And
love
so
it.
I did that for an entire year and would get up with the kids, or my husband would get up with the kids and I could sleep a little bit just because, excuse me, his schedule allowed that. So, and I think it was like my fourth or fifth blog post. And I'm talking like the blog was like black and white, bare minimum because I had no clue technology wise what I was doing. Fourth or fifth blog post, and it got shared on some sort of police Facebook page or
Mm.
something.
Yeah.
And it got 400,000 views in like a day.
Wow.
And I was like, "What in the world?" And then people were messaging like, "Do you have other blog posts?" I'm like, "Nope, I've got 4." Like, it was like all I had. But in that, I learned that obviously people wanted, like, more resources and wanted something that was positive. And
Hmm.
so I thought, "Okay, I'm gonna keep doing this." So that's kind of how Proud Police Wife was born. And I started the blog, and then after that, started my socials like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, which will probably be gone by the time this
Yeah, we'll
airs.
see, right? Hey, one less thing to worry
And
about because it's a lot to manage all these
exactly.
things. Yeah.
It really is. Yes. And then the podcast. And then I also have an annual conference that developed from all this too, that I do. It's virtual, and we're getting ready to have our 7th year. So April 2025 will be the 7th year of the annual Police Wife Conference. And then I have 2 books as well. So all of that grew, and I've never went back to teaching. So this is what I do full time now,
You
which
are
is just
teaching in a
crazy.
different vein,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Just not
Yeah.
kindergartners anymore.
Yeah. Sometimes there's some crossover, cops and all that, but
Yep.
we won't go down that rabbit hole. But
Yes.
I
Yes.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that story, and it
Yeah.
resonates with me. Serve the need is one of my personal mantras and
I
kind of
love
a
that.
theme of Blue Grit. Like, meet people where they're at, see what void, what necessity you can fill and help fill. And I hear that like in such a big way, right? It started small, and a nudge for people that they're trying to do something different. Maybe it's alongside this job, maybe it's a side hustle, maybe it's just helpful positive content. Like, that's really where this started too, was just sharing insight on my own personal social media, which was pretty taboo at the time to even say like I'm a cop.
Right.
I have like my fake name or whatever on Facebook, the goofy thing. But
Yeah,
um
with a tree profile picture.
yeah, I wasn't that. Yeah, but for sure, like
Nobody.
there was a group of us, all my buddies, that all had some like goofy, like kind of pseudonym. But all to say that it started with just kind of sharing like some hard things, and some a little bit was journalistic, and people, it really struck for some people, right? It resonated, and they're like, man, like this is really helpful. And I was like, no kidding, really? Like, I did it for me, but um,
Right,
and kind of to share, and a little bit of bridging community, a little bit of just sharing like what we're going through, because if you don't know, you don't know. If you don't
right, right.
personally know a cop, I think a lot of people just think that you're going to be so different, and just sharing that insight. So I love that.
Thank
As you
you.
continue to build and grow, I'm curious what some of the biggest lessons or themes that stick out to you, that you find you kind of keep revisiting, that we need to talk more about for police,
Yeah.
spouses, for families, and for cops themselves to recognize.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that in recent years, especially, I think this has always been there, but I think people or departments maybe are more accepting, is the fact that there needs to be at departments a way to recognize the families in some way. And I think it's important that there's just resources that, whether it is that they have a speaker once a year that comes in, and the spouse is invited too, so they can learn more about what it is that their loved one does, or whether it is when people get signed on with the department that they have like a family day and let them know about resources. Something to tie in the family, I think, is really important. And I think that is a piece that we haven't quite figured out yet, that I know that from all the spouses that I talk to so regularly, that's definitely a need still. Some departments are, I want to say, well on their way to having that mindset, to knowing they need to do that. Some do that if it's like a larger city, maybe, but then there's others that just have nothing whatsoever and have no idea about resources or anything that goes on at the department, or that, anything of that nature. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really big piece that still should kind of get worked out. And I think it's under that umbrella of just officer wellness too, because I think the first person to notice if there was something going on with the officer is the spouse.
Hmm.
And so I think if the spouse had someone they could contact, not saying that they need to like identify something at the department, but maybe just like, hey, this is a friend of an officer. And maybe if you notice that something's seriously wrong, then, you have someone that you can confidently talk to, or, we could go into that. I feel like that's like a deep
Yeah, it
conversation, but
is. Yeah, and spiderwebs in so many different ways, and I've thought
it
about it and
does.
felt different ways as time has evolved. And time evolving is not just my position and time on the job, but it's also the times, the quote unquote times where when I hired on, there was really no discussion of like public disclosure. And so if we
Yeah.
did have, and I've talked to other kind of wellness liaisons and leaders in my region at least, and like, how do you attack this? How do you help, share out resources? And a lot of times for us, I'll say like my department and surrounding departments, they kind of just rely on networks, right? So just off, outside of official capacity. And there's a lot of protective benefit in that. However, if it's not if it's not gelling and there's not that trust or kind of that collaboration, then it's kind of like, just there in the water, right? Just kind of floating around, floundering. But at the same time, I get where there's the reservation of, okay, now we send out information and now we have personal information and like
Yeah.
spousal emails and all this because we don't want, these, I'll just reserve what I want to call them, but these people that are just really attacking our culture in all these ways.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so oftentimes it paralyzes us, but I love that you have a conference, and that's kind of where my mind goes is like, I'm not saying it absolves the department from doing things and putting stuff
Right.
out, but oftentimes
Yeah.
we do that to the officer, whether they share that or not, we cannot control. But I love like having these kind of ancillary outward entities, I suppose, that are putting on these resources. And now like any family member that feels a little bit alone can easily find these resources, podcast, your page, and then conferences. And I know other entities and organizations do a lot of that, and so continue to
Yeah.
do more just makes it more accessible too.
For sure. And that's what I'll talk a little bit about the conference.
Yeah, please
And
do.
when I started it, just one of my main goals, we did virtual before it was like the cool thing to do for
Hmm.
COVID, because I really wanted to eliminate as many barriers for people getting resources as possible. And so I really wanted spouses and family members to be able to get these resources without having to take time off work, without childcare and travel and, a ton of costs like gas and hotel and food and what have you. And then I also wanted them to be able to watch and listen to the conference videos on their time. So there's no time constraint, because we know that literally everyone's schedule in law enforcement is going to be vastly different. So there was no way to accommodate that. So my goal was to really just deliver these resources, and they can watch and listen and tune in whenever it works for them. They can rewatch. So like if there's what we have happen a lot of times is if there's an episode that really kind of strikes a chord with a spouse, then she might say like, oh my gosh, I watched a video with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, and this was, fantastic. Like, watch this with me, or at least watch this piece. So then the officer is able to tune in as well, and benefit from it and hear the like the expert advice. So typically, every year we have 10 speakers that are just culturally competent experts from within like the law enforcement, first responder community. And we try to train up our speakers every single year. And the conference is always the last week in April. So obviously dates vary a little bit, but last week in April. And people can sign in and get access to the conference. The general admission pass is completely free. So we have sponsors that pay for those free spots so that
Nice.
spouses can attend for free. And they have all week long to listen to the different videos. And then we also have like tons of giveaways and like kind of like a Facebook group for like just talking about the conference and engaging and things like that. And so we've had the past 6 years, we've had over 25,000 families be able to access that, which has been
Wow.
incredible.
That's huge. Look at you. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful and it's such a blessing. And I love being able to just listen to the spouses and hear what they need and the families and hear what they need and being able to find just an expert to be able to answer their questions and talk about whatever it is that they might be struggling with. And we tend to have reoccurring themes, I feel like, but people always want to know about like dynamics with kids and juggling that. Nutrition tends to be a big one sometimes. And we even have officers that say, hey, can you find somebody that can talk about X, Y, and Z. So we try our best to find people that can talk about those topics and
Yeah.
get them the information.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Thank
And
you.
since we're on that, where can people? We're going to go a little bit out of order, but where can people find
Yeah,
out
it's
more
okay.
about you, your show, your pages, and the conference?
Yeah. So my website is proudpolicewife.com. And then on Instagram, it's proudpwife. And then on my website, there's a link for the conference and conference registration. So they'll be able to find that there. And really, you just type in Proud Police Wife anywhere, and my stuff pretty much comes up, whether it's social media, conference, my book. And then my podcast is also Proud Police Wife. And that's on, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, fantastic. What would you like to leave the
Thank you.
listeners with? And we'll break it down. So,
Yeah.
for the spouses, families, and then also for the cops, the first responders themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for the spouses is a couple things. One, your spouse misses you when they're working just as much as you miss them. And so it's just as hard sometimes for them to be away from home as it is, if you haven't seen them for a few days. So I think that perspective is really important, that it's not their fault that they've been away for, working around the clock, or you haven't been able to have a full conversation start to finish yet in a couple days, and they miss you just as much. Another thing for the spouse that I think is important is just, kind of the gist of what we talked about, but as a spouse, you deserve to have the resources too. I feel like, and it's absolutely needed. We need resources for police officers, 1000%. But I think we also need those resources for spouses and families too, so that we can understand the dynamics of law enforcement just a little bit so that we can help them, or to just understand our loved one and what they're going through a little bit better. And last but not least, I think it's one big thing that really, I think, impacted my husband and I, and then also just different friends we've had in law enforcement, and then spouses I talk to a lot, is that not everyone is going to understand your family dynamics or your schedules, and that is okay. It's not your job to make them understand. It's your job to put in boundaries. And, you may be celebrating things on a different day, and those are just days. You will find other time to be together with family, with friends, and you don't have to worry about what everybody else thinks. It's just what is good for you and your immediate family. So I think those are my top three for spouses.
Yeah.
And then for cops, I think one of the big ones is you are replaceable at work, but you are irreplaceable at home.
Mm, yeah.
And
Mic drop.
yes, it's just so important. It's so important to realize that, yes, this is a job, and sometimes it has a larger impact on our lives than other jobs. But at the end of the day, it's just a job.
Hmm.
And so you are replaceable. And if you left, they would fill your spot. But at home, that's where it counts. And so make sure that your family is first, like as much as possible. I understand with work, you can't always pick up your phone, or that's not what I'm talking about, but making sure you really put your family first when you are home, and as much as you absolutely can. Gosh, what else? I think another big one for cops is to have friends outside of the job. I think
Hmm.
it's important to step back and not make our whole life centered around just work and talking with, people who understand what you go through. Yes, that's important, but also having those people that we have friends that aren't in law enforcement or first responder world at all, but they still understand and still are respectful of the fact that like his schedule is different and all of those things. Or if they don't understand, they try to understand. So I think that's important, is to just have that separation a little bit. And then last but not least, I think what's really important too is to communicate with your spouse and open up to your spouse about your job. And I know I can already hear what a cop would say if he was listening to this right now. And most cops want to protect their spouse. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want to share the nitty-gritty details of work because they want to protect them in some way, and that is okay. But letting them in a little bit. I know I would not understand as much about this job if my husband didn't talk to me. And he does a really good job at that. And he doesn't, I mean, we have boundaries. There's some things I don't want to hear about. I'm like, that's a no go
Yep.
for
I
me.
found I found that line really quickly.
Yep. And but we didn't know till we talked about it.
Yes.
And but he shares other things with me. And or it like we have, just certain things for our relationship that work. Just him communicating and saying, like, hey, been a rough day, need to go take a walk. Like we have property now. And
Yeah.
so I know like if he's outside walking the trails or whatever for a while, it was a rough day.
Yes.
And so like we're going to give him a little bit of space. Kind of have to train your kids on that sometimes because they see him pulled
Yeah.
in, they
They're
want to
so
run
excited.
outside.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's a work in progress. But I know just from communication with him that that is what he needs. And I'm going to give him that time. So that's what I mean in the terms of communication. I wouldn't know that my husband needed to decompress a little bit when he comes home from work unless he communicated that with me, because I was that spouse at one point when he first started and we had a baby that was crying for hours and I couldn't wait to get a break when he got home, and I would hand him that baby as soon as he walked in the door, and that was probably the worst thing I could do because he needed just like 20 minutes to get the clothes off, because he explained to me like, I go in other people's houses and I don't want to be holding our baby with whatever house I was in. And like, I didn't know those things until he told me. So that's kind of the level of communication I mean, in the sense of opening up a little bit. In regards to your job, it doesn't have to be nitty gritty details. You can still protect them while kind of telling them what you need. So that was a really long answer.
No, I love that. And I'm going to recap some of it because I really want to drive these points home. And they are recurring themes here, too. And one is that you are replaceable. And it is not meant to be cold. It just is. And there's no better teachers of that than those that retire after a full career or they decide to leave after 8, 10 years. And they're just like, yeah, it's such a huge piece of your life, but you have to move on. Just like they have to move on. Like there's people still calling 911 and they can't always be like, hey, Eric, how are things? Like you have enough hobbies? Are you keeping your head on straight? Like you have your personal relationship, sure, but the agency doesn't have feelings. It just has to do what it has to do.
Right.
And then I love the fact that you recognize like living outside the blue world. So much of your page and in all of this project is like sharing these insights within the community. I think that, going back to an earlier discussion towards the very beginning was also recognizing like it's a balance. Like we don't have to be and we shouldn't be like, woe is me. There's nothing harder than running a first responder family. Like, yeah, there are hard things. There's also amazing things, right? So recognizing that growth mindset, because sometimes I have this group of guys where I meet up with, and none of them are cops. They're my college buddies, and it's on a calendar monthly. There's not a lot of things I put that rigidly now, but it's so helpful because I hear them talking about work and stress, and then home. I'm like, cool. I'm just here. I have a very different job, but at the end of the day, it is work, and we are oftentimes talking about family dynamics and how do we keep some sort of semblance of balance, right? Like how do we keep it from bleeding into our lives? And that goes to the next point that you started with, I believe, or one of them was just recognizing like the first responder does so badly want to be home with their family. When they don't rush back in, there's a lot of reasons, and sometimes people aren't that aware of what that is, and so you talk about it, and so just recognize it is so powerful. I'm working with a guy, and he's so introspective. Hats off to him because he's like, yeah, I want to be with the family, but I know I'm like kind of in my head, and I don't want to show up like this cheapened version. I'm like, yes, like that's awesome. Like you have that
Yeah.
awareness, and I almost feel like personality is dependent, but there are us types that are so like we have to be doing something that if we're not feeling useful with the family, like let's say you want to play with your kid and your kid runs away, you're like, okay, I guess I'll just look at my phone and doom scroll. Like you don't make that
Right.
conscious decision, but you need to be active. And so whereas you could just be like, okay, I'm going to set 5 minutes on the timer, I'm going to sit with my eyes closed and work on my breath work, or I'm going to journal, I'm going to fill one page, not a ton, just like one little page, and then I'm going to go join my family because dumped all these thoughts and feelings and whatever. Everything's going to be different for everyone. I love the walkabout, that your husband does. I say the same thing. Just communicate simple text on the way home or before you head home, like, hey, it's been a day. And then partner knows, okay, change out, grab the leash, take the dog, 5-10 minutes. And that could be so, so healing and impactful. So
Yeah,
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 a great
absolutely.
range of things that you shared.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's powerful what 10 to 20 minutes does to just kind of reset their brain and breathe and be in quiet. And I think just that nature piece
Yes.
too. Like I know for my husband, like he's a hunter, and so it's very healing for him to just be outside and not hear all the noise. And then another big piece is for him is not making another decision, because
Mm,
you guys make decisions all day
mm-hmm.
long. He needs a little time to just not make a decision. And so, I know for me, it can like be simple in the fact that I'm choosing what's for dinner. I'm choosing, those little things at home. I don't have to ask him to make a decision. Yes, he does make decisions at home. Not saying that, but after a
Sure.
long, rough day,
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask him 1,000 questions. Did I used to do that? Yes.
Yeah.
But
Because you
we
care.
worked on that
Because you
too.
care.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I care. And it's just been a lot of time to figure that out. And so I think, thank you for highlighting those. I hope that those are helpful to your listeners, whether
Oh,
it's a
absolutely,
spouse
they
or
will
a
be.
cop.
Yeah, they're helpful for
Good,
me, and I know that they're always these constant
good.
reminders. We just need more. So, yeah, well, thank you so much, Rebecca, and I really want to respect your time. And I know we have to flip and you know teaser to the listeners. I don't know who's going to drop first. Probably you, because I think you're more on it than I am. But I'll be on Rebecca's show too. So share out both. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was such an honor, and it was just so fun to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. Oftentimes, there's a lot of candidates that want to take the next step in the organization and promote. However, they find themselves at an impasse with where to start. Or they know where to start, but they know that there are so many different elements that are extremely arduous, challenging, and stressful to prepare for. I've prepared a guide because I want to help everyone, no matter what their confidence level is in public speaking or recognizing the different elements or how to show up your best way and highlight your leadership style. A lot of times, those folks know exactly what it takes to be a leader because they do it at the line level. However, they are surpassed by those that simply test better, have the gift of the gab, whether or not they actually can put anything behind it, or they've taken the test so many times that they've slowly edged their way up that list and eventually may be in striking zone for a promotion. So if getting selected for the next rank is of interest to you, I highly recommend you do your homework and you recognize resources. And part of doing that homework and recognizing resources is the guide I've prepared. It hones in on a lot of my lessons learned from being on both sides of the table, testing as a sergeant. And although I got the nod in the first round, when I looked at the notes, there were a lot of things I misunderstood. There were a lot of things where I didn't present my best way. I was just fortunate that my total test score was I was fortunate that my total testing process was successful enough to get me in. And then for commander, doing that internal process and external process, seeing some dramatic differences, coming out on top of both processes. However, learning again, when I looked at the notes, there was so much that I left on the table, or so much that I misrepresented myself, or I didn't convey what I had intended to the assessor. So with all those lessons learned, breaking down the common test components, and also, arguably more importantly, how you identify, define, and prepare your own leadership philosophy that you can not only take into the test, but you can take into your day-to-day interactions with your team, your peers, your subordinates, and your leaders, right? Because leading up is a critical part of organizational development and culture as well. So for more on the guide, you can find it at bluegritwellness.com. That's the promotional guide at bluegritwellness.com/shop. And whether or not you are looking to promote, we all know those people that should be taking the next test that we keep nudging. And those people need to be empowered. They need to find confidence. And a lot of that can come from you just giving them that nod, giving them that support, that encouragement, and telling them where to find the guide. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.